Hello and welcome to another episode of our Brothers Creed podcast where we talk about motivation, experiences, and we explore the world around us. We are the Thomas Brothers, and I'm Jared.
And I'm Ethan. And today we're going to be talking about the infamous ATF. So the ATF, also known as Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms Division.
Or BATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms.
The Bureau, right?
Yeah.
It's we'll go into a little bit more detail, but basically it's part of the DOJ or the Department of Justice. And they have had quite a few situations in the past, let's say, I don't know, even 30 years.
Yeah.
Some issues, right? Some situations that they were supposed to handle that maybe they didn't handle quite correctly.
to say it at the very least.
Yeah. And so I'm sure you guys have probably heard of these stories. We're going to go into a little bit more detail. Obviously, we could have full episodes on some of these stories, but we're going to talk about some of the failures that the ATF ran into, as well as some of kind of the potential laws as related to mostly firearms that the ATF has come out with recently, and some of their ideals that are, let's say, questionable. So it's going to be a really informational episode. It's really fun to kind of dig into some of these things, some interesting stories. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm back.
The most valuable commodity I know of is information.
And that, my friends, is called integrity. That's called courage. Now that's the stuff leaders should be made of.
Either you're somebody or you're nobody.
You're not the devil. You're practice.
All right. So as we mentioned before, the ATF, the actual long name is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They are a federal law enforcement agency, not so unlike the FBI
Or the CIA.
or the CIA, very similar. They're responsible for enforcing federal laws related to firearms, explosives, and arson. Like we mentioned before, they're part of the Department of Justice and are headquartered in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, interestingly enough, though, they were moved from the Department of Treasury to the Department of Justice in 2002.
Interesting.
So they're kind of like the redheaded stepchild that is like really super annoying and everybody hates, and they just feed them scraps. As far as like the law enforcement agencies of the government, because like they don't really have a place. They're kind of they're underfunded. Well, some would say they're underfunded. I would say no funding and canceling the whole thing is probably what we should do. But they,
I think historically they've had kind of less training than some of the other agencies.
yeah, and as you'll see in both of these stories, they go into a situation, totally F it up, and then the FBI or the federal marshals or something like that has to come in and try to do better, but the FBI many times doesn't do any better either.
Yeah. So the ATF's mission is to protect the public from violent crimes, particularly crimes that are involving the illegal use of firearms and explosives. They work to prevent terrorism and enforce federal criminal laws related to trafficking of firearms, regulation of firearms, and explosive industries in the United States as well. They also work to reduce the impact of violent crime on communities by working with other federal, local, state law enforcement agencies like we talked about. So that's just a little bit about the ATF, who they are, what they do, what their mission is. And so we'll kind of get into some different stories of, did they overstep their boundaries, or are they trying to, sometimes when someone tries so hard to prove themselves that it's just like It's
those
just like, face
Yeah.
palm. It's just like, oh my gosh.
those people are called tryhards.
Yeah.
And dude, these stories are. I was talking to a guy at work today. He was born in 1990, and so when I talked to him, it's funny. He may listen to this episode, but when I talked to him, I'm like, "Have you seen this movie? Have you seen Dumb and Dumber? Have you seen Tommy Boy?" And he's like, "Those are before I was born, man. I've never seen those movies." And I'm like, "Bro," and I was like, "Dude, have you seen?" I was like, "Have you heard about Ruby Ridge?" And he was like, "No." So I think we're living in a generation. Well, the younger generation may not know anything about Ruby Ridge or Waco, and what are some of the things that happen there. And I think this is stuff that you should not forget about. These are two major stories Ethan and I are going to talk about today. Major instances where the ATF totally screwed up and way overstepped their bounds, almost to a tyrannical extent. In many of these cases. There's other ones that I think Ethan's mentioned before in a podcast, Fast and the Furious. That was a major recent scandal in the 2000s during the Obama administration. It couldn't have been during the Obama administration because Obama said that when he left office, he didn't have any major scandals. So
it was in 2009 to 2011.
No, I'm just joking.
Yeah, right.
He said there was no major scandals, but there definitely were. It was... during that era, and but that's not the main part of the discussion. The main part of the discussion today is we're going to talk about Ruby Ridge and Waco. We could talk we could do a whole season on both of these. Like heck, we could do a 2-episode thing on just Ruby Ridge itself because there's so much here. But I'll talk about this one first because this one actually happened first, right, Ethan?
Yeah. I think Ruby Ridge happened first.
So I'll talk about this one first. So. This one is pretty insane. After all this went down, there was a congressional hearing and in-depth review of this. I mean, there's a 500-page document that I was reading through, digging through all these information, what the Congressional Hearing Committee said about it, what they said their recommendations were. So much. So I'm going to give you a real high-level view. I've watched some videos with this guy's daughter, with this guy himself, explaining what happened. So let me give you a little bit of background. So there's a guy named Randy Weaver. Randy Weaver, he was born in 1948. He was one of 4 children. He's a real religious guy, kind of a fundamentalist. And he was, in 1968, at the age of 20, he joined the United States Army during the height of the Vietnam War. He became a Green Beret, Special Forces in the U.S. Army. After he came back from the Army, he married his sweetheart and wife, Vicki Jordanson, in 1971. She's kind of a firecracker of a lady, as you'll see. He got a job at the John Deere tractor factory, and his wife was a secretary and homemaker. During the first part of their marriage, they became concerned with kind of the state of things in the country. I mean, if you Vietnam era, late 60s, everything was really hectic. There's a lot of social discord. So he says, you know what, honey? Let's sell all of our stuff and move to the mountains somewhere in Idaho, get off grid. So what they did is they sold their truck and they bought a piece of 20 acres of land in Idaho Boundary County woodlands for about $500 an acre, which is pretty cheap. 20 acres for $500 an acre. That's awesome. But it was raw land, nothing there. He actually, in a newspaper article before he left, he said he wanted to go out and live in the woods to survive, quote, the Great Tribulation. So some of this was religiously motivated. As a former Green Beret, he said he was going to set up this property so that he could defend it when the Great Tribulation happened, and he kind of had built these kill zones and stuff like that. Lots of stuff that you see today on these shows like Preppers, these doomsday preppers. I've seen so many shows where they'll like funnel the driveway into a kill zone, and then they'll practice with their kids, shooting someone coming through the kill zone. So stuff that today is pretty commonplace. I mean, he was just trying to protect his property, and that's what he was kind of setting up. So he's a Green Beret, obviously trained individual. So he said him and his wife built this cabin out there, middle of nowhere. No plumbing, no running water, just, they had well that they could crank up water from, and then they had no electricity. So it's just a cabin out in the woods. So the trouble with him started in 1985. Allegedly, someone brought to the attention to the Secret Service, local authorities, and then later to the Secret Service, that Randy Weaver had made some threats against President Ronald Reagan, the Idaho governor, John Evans, and then certain law enforcement officials. So the Secret Service got involved, and they interviewed him, and they claimed that Randy said, I didn't say those things. So that's not coming from me. Now, generally, this guy is kind of an anti-government person, but he did just fight for the U.S. Army in Vietnam. So he says, I'm not, I didn't say any of that or whatever. And the Secret Service is saying, hey, well, they concluded that this guy, he's got lots of guns, probably unlimited ammo, quote unquote. That's what they said.
Unlimited. That'd be nice.
Yeah, that'd be nice. And they made a connection between him and this group that was up in the Idaho area called the Aryan Nation Group. And this happened in 1985. In 1985, in February of that year, Randy and Vicki Weaver filed a handwritten affidavit with the Boundary County clerks claiming that persons around the Deep Creek, Idaho area were conspiring to endanger the Weaver family and to precipitate an attack on the Randy Weaver's life. The affidavit alleges that Weaver accusers had made false statements about his connection with the Aryan nations and his ownership of illegal weapons, and that they were wrongfully alleged that he had threatened the president and the Pope. Of course, the Pope, good luck getting past that bulletproof golf cart,
Yeah.
The Weavers also stated that these falsehoods were designed to provoke the FBI into storming their home. Weaver expressed fear that he would be killed or arrested for assault of a federal officer if he tried to defend himself, and he gave legal official notice that he believes that he may have to defend himself and his family from physical attacks on his life. That was sent to the county clerk in 1985. Watch what happens next. In 1986, the ATF was investigating a series of bombings in Coeur d'Alene, which is northern Idaho, and it was thought that the so-called Aryan Nation was responsible for this. So enter ATF and confidential informant Kenneth Fedeli. So Kenneth Fedeli, who's the confidential ATF informant, undercover, he goes to these conferences. The ATF asked him, hey, go to these conferences and see if you can see anybody doing anything illegal, okay? And so Fedeli portrayed himself as a weapons dealer who catered to motorcycle gangs and so forth. So he's like, hey, man, I can procure you any weapons you want, under the table, of course, kind of a thing. And he's supposed to be looking for any shady activity. Now, there were allegations that he was being compensated like on a commission basis for anybody that he found out, quote unquote, or entrapped, which is what other people say. So what happened is that Fedeli was introduced to Randy Weaver at one of these world conferences that was held in locally there, I think. And Fedeli later invited him to kind of on a gun deal, and Randy just kind of went along, but he didn't do anything. The next year, Randy was there with his wife and kids at this conference again, and Fedeli saw him again. And Randy expressed his struggle that he was going through. He says, I need a job. I'm struggling to make ends meet. And he also mentioned that he did not trust the Aryan Nation's leader and did not agree with what that group leader was doing. Expressed this to the informant. And in 1988, Randy was on hard times, man. He actually ran in the Republican primary for county sheriff, using the slogan, get out of jail free. And he was kind of adamant against taxes. I would listen to a story from him, and he said that he had a buddy that worked his whole life in the railroad industry in California. He owed $500 to the IRS in taxes. The guy said, I'm not paying that. So he moves to Idaho, buys a bunch of land. The guy's living life. And then the guy gets arrested, and then the IRS says, oh, now you owe us $60,000. And they auction off his whole estate and everything. So he's really against the IRS, right? He said that he was on the radio station multiple times. People will call and say, hey, why are you running for sheriff? He said, well, one, I don't want these federal agents coming around here. And 2, I need a job because I'm poor. And so that was kind of, was unsuccessful though. He didn't actually get into the office there. But later in 1989, Weaver ran into the informant, Fideli, again at one of these conferences. But this time he said, "Hey, how's the business going?" And the Fideli says, "Business is great, man. Business is awesome. The gun business is doing so great. You want to make some money?" And he's like, "Yeah, I can make some money. I need some money." And so
Preying on the weak.
he said, "Yeah, exactly." So Randy invited him to meet some of his buddies, and the informant got Randy basically, essentially, long story short, he got him to sell him 2 sawed-off shotguns. And then he had a wire on him, and he said, "Oh, where did you cut these shotguns?" He said, "Well, I was under a tree and just sawed off these shotguns." And the guy promised him, several $100s just to saw off 2 shotguns. I think it was like a 12.5-inch shotgun, just to saw off the things and give it to him.
Which makes him illegal.
Which makes it illegal. So the section 5681 of the Title 26 of the United States Code criminalizes the possession of unregistered firearms and the altering of firearms by anyone not in the business of manufacturing firearms. So firearms includes shotguns that are barrels that are less than 16 inches. So by cutting that barrel less than 16 inches, automatically he became a criminal. And so what they did is the government, ATF, says, "Okay, we got this guy." So several months later, the ATF agents go up to his house and say, "Hey, we've got you. We knew that you sold those 2 sawed-off shotguns. Now, you can either join us and give us information on the Aryan Nation, or you can, we'll arrest you." And he's basically like, first of all, I'm not that involved with the Aryan Nation anyway, and second of all, I'm not a snitch, so get lost, basically. And so they left, and they're like, "Oh, gosh." So what they did is they actually did like a weird trick. They were like, "Oh, we got to get this guy away from his property. We got to trick him." So the ATF actually posed as like stranded motorists on the side of the road. And so him and his wife stopped to help, like with the hood up and everything on a camper. Him and his wife said, "Oh, someone's stranded." They stopped, got out to help. And then when they got out to help, ATF agents came out of the back of the trailer, and the ones that were, these supposed stranded tourists were like, "Freeze, we got you." He's like, "You dogs, you tricked me," or whatever. He actually tried to grab one of their guns, but they got him. And so they went and they arrested him. Weaver was arraigned on the weapons charges in January of 1991. He was told that his trial would commence on February 19th, 1991. Now, this is some important details here. 2 weeks later, the court clerk notified the parties that the trial date had been changed to February 20th. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. Probation Office sent Weaver a letter incorrectly referencing his trial date to March 20th, 1991. It was a typo, they said. Oops, sorry. After Weaver failed to appear for the trial on February 20th, the court issued a bench warrant for his arrest. The week later, on March 14th, a federal grand jury indicted Weaver for his failure to appear for trial. And then this was
that is so skeezy.
Oh yeah.
Oh, it was a typo, and they gave him the wrong date, so he didn't show up. And then they have a warrant out for his arrest.
Yep. So the committee found that we found that the government, especially the USAO or the Attorney Office, was unnecessarily rigid in its approach to the issues created by this erroneous letter. That the USAO improvidently sought an indictment before March 20th, which was when the letter said that he had to be there in any way, and that the U.S. Attorney's Office is erred in failing to inform the grand jury of the erroneous letter. So the guy said, "Oh, my bad, it was a typo," So stuff like this all along the way. So basically, when he got arrested, this is from his own mouth. He said, "Yeah, like my wife came and I had to post bond, and so I had to post my property up as a bond." And my wife was just like, he said, "I don't want to know if I want to do this." And his wife is just like, "Do it now." And so he's like, "Okay." So he goes up and they go up into their property, and they're getting all kinds of correspondence. And his wife's like, "You know what? And he's up there. He's saying, "I'm scared that they're going to come up here and try to kill all of us." And his wife's like, "We're not leaving this property because I don't want them to come after us. I don't want them to get you. We're staying here as a family. So it's him, 16-year-old daughter, 14-year-old son, and then 2 daughters. From that point in 1991, 18 months later, he has another baby up at his property. He didn't come down from his property for 18 months. And then in August of 1992, the federal marshal, so from February of 91 to August of 92, the federal marshals have been doing this big plan, trying to figure out how to get up there, how to get him out, how to do all this stuff. And so there was, I think, 2 federal marshals. I read 2, but then somewhere else I read 6. Anywhere, they were in all camo. They were on his property, and they were trying to figure out, scope out the area, see where the house cabin was and all this kind of stuff. So on that morning of the 21st of August, his dogs start barking like crazy. So him, Randy Weaver, his son Sammy, and another family friend named Kevin, they all start running out after, what's going on, running out after this thing. And a gun battle ensued. And the 14-year-old Sammy Weaver got shot in the elbow, shot in the back, and he got killed. And a deputy marshal was killed at that same time. And Kevin, who was the buddy of Randy Weaver that was up there, he was actually, I believe his name was Kevin. He was actually said later that he was the one that shot that. Oh, excuse me, his name was Harris. Last name Harris, I think. He's the one that said he shot that marshal. And so, that was bad news bears. So the next day, the FBI sends out their hostage rescue team up to the property and surround the entire property. And so there's snipers covering the whole area, and they were instructed, their rules of engagement, which have since been rewritten because of all this, their rules of engagement were, if you see any male with a weapon outside the cabin, shoot him immediately. That was their rules of engagement. And nowadays, they've changed the rules since this because of this. That's like, unless there's absolutely no other option, and it's unreasonable, and you're unable to announce yourself or to tell the person you're going to fire at them, then you're able to fire. But then they were just like, hey man, if you see any male with a gun, shoot him. And so what happened is the sniper. So there was 2 people outside. They had killed Randy Weaver's son. He took his son and put him in one of like the little sheds out back that was like it was like a spare room. So he was out at this little shed, and this sniper goes click, click, shoots 2 shots right in succession. And this is the next day, mind you. He thought that Randy had a gun, and he thought that Randy was going to go up and shoot the helicopter that was above. So the bullet went right through Randy's shoulder and through the side of the shed that he had just come out of, because he was looking at it. He was just saying goodbye to his son that had died. They had kind of wrapped him up, and put him in his body in the shed. And actually, what's funny is that his daughter, I saw an interview, and she still has that property. They still have that property today, and she's still got that shed, and you can still see where that bullet hole went through that shed, went through his shoulder. Well, obviously, he's in a nice shoulder, but you can see where it went through that shed. So he books it inside, and then his other buddy, Harris, was on the front porch, and he tucked back inside too, and he got shot. The other guy shot him, which he was just standing there. He shot him, and the bullet went like through his ribs, through his back, hit his ribs, cracked his ribs, punctured his lung. I think it hit through his arm, maybe some, and then the bullet continued to go through a window and shot Vicky Weaver, Randy's wife. Killed her instantly. She was holding their 18-month-old baby in her hands. And his 16-year-old daughter was standing right there when this whole thing happened. And she said, I just felt blood all over my face, and the baby just dropped to the ground. And for the next 8 days, Harris and Weaver were inside that house. And Harris was shot and badly, and Randy Weaver was hurt too because he got shot through the shoulder. So she was trying to attend to them and take care of the kids. Their mom is dead on the floor. And the FBI, they didn't try to negotiate or do anything. They were just coming out shooting. So they're like, if we literally step out of this place, we're going to get killed. So a local civilian named Bo Gritz, who was also a former Green Beret, he's the one that decided to come in and try to do a negotiation. So he actually did a negotiation with Randy to say, hey, let us come in, and the locals, by the way, the locals during this whole thing, these 11 days, they're going crazy down with like where the press line is. They're like, Randy's a good guy. He would never hurt anybody. You guys are attacking him. And they send some fellow locals up to the cabin to take his wife's body away. And then Harris surrenders, and obviously he gets medical attention right away. And then it was like 3 days after that, Randy and his 3 daughters walked out and surrendered as well because of the negotiation that Bo Gritz did. And she just said that when we walked out of that thing, she was like, every single step we took, we were just thought we would get shot. Every single step. And so the FBI took them, and they totally botched every single little thing. They went into the crime scene, and listen to this little blurb from that analysis. They said, during and after the crisis, the crime scenes were searched by many law enforcement officials under the direct supervision of the FBI. We found the FBI's handling of the crime scene searches to be inadequate, including its failure to use basic crime scene techniques in collecting evidence. Furthermore, the general disorganization and experience of some of the participants, coupled with the inaccuracies in searches, adversely affected the prosecution and contributed to the negative impression of the government's generated during the trial. We found no evidence that the deficiencies were intentional or that the FBI staged evidence for the prosecution's benefit. So
so they're not malicious. They're just incompetent.
Well, yeah, the government is saying that the government isn't incompetent. So what happened is that before I tell you the outcome of everything, there's so much to this. The FBI's lab was just absolutely ridiculous. They were falsifying all this stuff. They were dragging their feet. The defense. So Randy goes to court, right? And they try to charge him all this kind of stuff. They try to charge him for conspiracy charges. They try to charge him for murder charges for killing that marshal. They actually try to get him the death penalty for all this. And when the grand jury said, hey, we want to investigate the death of Vicky, his wife, the U.S. attorney lied and told them incorrectly. He lied. He said, oh, no, that's not within your jurisdiction to do so. And they tried to seek the death penalty for Randy and Kevin Harris. Oh, his name was Kevin. And the U.S. attorney's office wanted help. They wanted help as a prosecution, but also the defense was like, hey, we need documents. We need paperwork. They're entitled to all this evidence. But the FBI keep dragging their feet, delaying, making they made so many mistakes. And so when you're explaining all this to the jury, they're like, dude, this FBI is absolutely amateur hour, and they're trying to cover up all their mistakes. And so the Weaver was charged with multiple crimes, including murder, but the judge dismissed basically all of them. He dismissed the 2 counts after the hearing the prosecution witness testimony. The jury acquitted Weaver of all remaining charges except 2, one of which the judge set aside. He was found guilty of 1 count of failure to appear, for which he was fined $10,000 and sentenced to 18 months in prison. He was credited with time served and plus an additional 3 months, and then he was released. Kevin Harris was acquitted of all crimes and charges. So they were basically said, well, you're let go. I mean, we just sorry that you didn't appear for this bench warrant. One of the, I think 2 of the agents, FBI agents, were investigated. One of the investigations was dropped on one. Another one, I heard that he actually spent 18 months in jail, and then he was let go. And Randy Weaver later sued the government. He was awarded $100,000, and each of his 3 daughters were awarded $1 million each. But interesting, when you hear his daughter talk about it, she's like, that's basically blood money for them killing my brother and my mom. So she's still, that oldest daughter that was 16 during that whole thing, she still owns that property to this day. And she still has that little shed out in the backyard, like I mentioned. So what a crazy, example of how the government just absolutely overstepped, and these ATF guys. And the whole thing was, lots of people said this is entrapment, because that informant was like, hey, you want to make some money? But the government, the committee that researched this thing, they said, well, technically that's not entrapment, because they didn't encourage to do something that he felt uncomfortable doing. So because there was no evidence of an overt encouragement against his will, it's not entrapment.
Well, he might not even have known that sawing off the shotguns was illegal. He's like, okay, you pay me a couple $100, I'll do this. I mean, sure, why not? But
yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I
It's
can't
just
tell
shady,
that. And then
shady from the beginning.
yeah, then because he had gone to a couple of these Aryan conferences, there were a lot of things like, oh, this guy's a Nazi, Green Beret, anti-government guy, let's go kill him, kind of a thing. And so there was a lot of that going around. But crazy, ATF goes after this guy, kills his kid and his wife, and all over just not appearing for a trial. And
well, I think what happens sometimes, and we'll kind of see this too with the Waco thing, but I think what happens is you get some of these agencies, or even like these individual agents, that they get fixated on something, and they get fixated on this one guy, and kind of probably the overarching goal was to
make an arrest.
learn more about or I'd say even just the first goal was to learn more about the Aryan Brotherhood or whatever up in the area.
Yep.
But then they just kind of focused in on this one guy
because they couldn't find anything else. Yeah.
Couldn't find anything else. And I think a lot of it, and I think this is the case. Well, not just in these government agencies, but I guess in any industry. But people are trying to, they're like, oh, this is my career-winning project.
Arrest.
This is my career-winning arrest. This is and so they'll go so far and do so many things that are unethical and everything else, even if you are a police officer, or an ATF agent or whatever. You'll go above and beyond just to prove yourself, to get that promotion, to whatever. I think that's a downfall of some of these agencies, because it's just like, this guy was completely railroaded, and it was proven in the end by saying, yeah, well, sorry, our bad. I mean,
yeah,
here's $3.1 million of taxpayers' money to help you feel better. Like that, like the daughter said, that's blood money. But at the same point, we should be upset because that's our money that's paying for that stuff.
Well, I'm not really mad about the money. I mean, I think.
Well, no, I'm just saying. I mean, I think they should be compensated, but the compensation is fine. I'm just saying it's just a misuse and misrepresentation across the board of, like, I don't know, just the way it was handled.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that the government. I think every single one of those people that was on that property should lose their job. Should never be ever allowed to be in any law enforcement agency ever again. But then we have, what is it? Biden just put up one of these guys who was at Waco, these ATF guys who was at Waco, and likely Ruby Ridge too, up as the head of the ATF. These guys are still around, screwing around. And so, it's like just shocking that this kind of thing happens, and that, the guy didn't hardly do anything, and the ATF came up to his house and killed half his family, and they're just like, we're going to kill you over not showing up for your court date. And that's what it's going to be. So it's and also they were both acquitted of that murder of that self-defense of that marshal that was deemed self-defense.
Yeah. Well, and I think too that there probably was people that were promoted from this incident. I mean, isn't that crazy to think?
Yeah, I don't know if there are people promoted from this incident, because this was a really bad mark on them. And not just them, but the FBI too, because the FBI too was majorly involved. I mean, this is just as bad on the FBI as it is the ATF.
Yeah, that's true.
But then, that was in 1992. 1993, the next year later, that's when Waco happens, right? Tell us about Waco.
Yeah, so Waco was crazy. So to get a little bit more into what happened to Waco. So Ruby Ridge was, 1988, 89, 90, 91? I mean, it's kind of all in there, right?
Yeah, it culminated in 1992, August of 92.
Yeah, so Waco was the next year. So, I mean, they're coming off of this one huge thing, and then they just go right into another situation. So a little bit of the background. So this happened in Waco, Texas. The ATF was involved in a very controversial incident. What happened was there was a standoff between the ATF and the Branch Davidians. The Branch Davidians were a religious group led by a guy named David Koresh. It's Koresh, right? Is that how you say it?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's it. So the Branch Davidians were a small apocalyptic sect, let's say, that believed that the coming apocalypse was kind of upon us, and that Koresh was a prophet at that time, and that he was going to be the one that would lead them through the apocalypse. It's kind of, I guess, some of the basis of what they believed. There were some very questionable practices that were being performed.
Wasn't he taking on these guys, like his followers, who take their wives as his own wives?
Yeah, he would. He would say, just some kind of weird stuff with that. And there were a lot of followers that were very loyal and were very adamant in saying, "Oh, we're following David. He's the prophet and everything else." But there was some people after a while that there started to be a little bit of dissension. But we can get into that a little bit later. But what happened was the Branch Davidians in Texas, part of their apocalyptic preparation was to accumulate firearms. And they were accumulating quite a few firearms, and for the most part, they were collecting these legally. They weren't illegal drugs or firearms or whatever else. But this caught the eye of the ATF, who had some, whether it was informants or they were tipped off about some large gun purchases in that area. And so on February 28th, 1993, the ATF attempted to execute a search warrant on the Branch Davidians' compound in Waco. So they had built this massive compound that was this huge standalone building. I can't remember how big it was, but it had a whole chapel inside of it, and had whole living quarters, and it was a big multi-story building that there was quite a few people living in. Almost 100 people were living in this building. So the ATF executed a search warrant, and the warrant was related to these allegations of illegal weapon possession.
Well, that wasn't like straw man purchasing or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. One person buying for another person, or transfers, or they just were kind of looking for any situation where they would have had illegal weapons. And I think it was kind of fueled as well by some of the rumorings of
this guy with kids and
weird things they were doing, and some of their beliefs, and so it kind of escalated into that. So on February 28th, they issued this warrant, and they actually this raid quickly turned violent, and it went from, hey, we have a search warrant to look for illegal guns, to basically an all-out shootout between the Branch Davidians and the ATF. In the end, 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians were killed during that shootout. And that was initially just the execution of the search warrant.
But did the ATF just come up guns blazing, just start shooting up the place?
Oh yeah, they came in, and they didn't do it kindly. Basically, they came in, started knocking on the door, and then they waited very little time, and then just started blowing rounds through the front door. And that's when the Branch Davidians started shooting back. And
if you think the apocalypse is upon us, and people start breaking into your compound and shooting you up,
shooting the front door.
That's like the worst thing you could do to people like that.
Yeah. It's just like inciting violence. And this is a common trend. Violence just seeds more violence. And so after that shootout, 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians died. Obviously, this is now a big deal. Needless to say. So the Branch Davidians basically locked themselves in this big building, this big compound. And a standoff ensued. So this standoff lasted where the ATF was outside, the Branch Davidians were locked inside of this compound for 51 days. And the Branch Davidians refused to leave the compound and surrender to the ATF. So, of course, the ATF didn't like this. And so instead of, let's say, trying to immediately get in and negotiate and de-escalate, well, they just laid in harder. So they cut off all communication. I mean, this was 1993, so like cell phones really weren't a thing. And so they cut off all landlines, cut off all communication with the outside world. And then they started using basically torture tactics to get these people to try to leave. So for the next 51 or the majority of the next 51 days, what they did is they used several different tactics. I'm going to kind of go through them. So one of the first tactics they used was loud music and voices. So what they did is they set up speakers, just massive speakers all around this compound, and they would just blare music and noises and sounds over these speakers day and night. Like
screaming and loud.
So some of the things they would play would be the Ride of the Valkyries, which is kind of like a common song. We'll put that song on once on our social media so you guys can listen to it really loud over and over again for 51 days straight.
Okay.
So that was one
instead of
did.
because they were trying to sleep deprive them. That was what they were trying to do.
So they did that, loud music. They broadcasted loud voices. They broadcasted the sounds of rabbits being slaughtered. So just like screaming rabbits being slaughtered. And basically what they were trying to wear them down. They're trying to sleep deprive them. They're trying to just undermine their morale completely. So that was the first thing they did. Then they also implemented bright lights. So they brought huge bright lights in, and they shined these bright lights in all the windows so that even at night, it was like the lights were so bright that it was like daytime. And so it was throwing everybody off. They couldn't sleep because of the loud noises and the bright lights. Next, they got water hoses. Law enforcement they'd bring out fire trucks, get water hoses, and they would just constantly spraying the house and the whole compound with water. I don't know if they were trying to
how do they not expect these people to like, these people are armed. How do they, and they're pushing them. Would they not expect these people to just unload on them? I mean, like, was that a question?
I don't know.
I mean, if I was already gotten a gunfight with someone, and then I start using these like torture, psychological warfare tactics, how could I not expect someone to just stick their arm out the window and absolutely just mow down as many people as they, or like just shoot into the tents or wherever everybody's at, you know?
Well, and the thing is too, is you think, who is the person that I want to put, have a gun in their hand? Oh, an extremely angry and sleep deprived person. Yeah, that's the person I want to have a gun in their hand.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So the last tactic they used was tear gas. So they used shot tear gas canisters up into the windows whenever they could, which just completely wreaked havoc on whoever was inside. And the Branch Davidians, they would block the windows. They put blankets over the windows, try to block out the light. And they would stay away from the windows. They'd stay kind of in the inner sanctum areas of the compound. So eventually,
What question? Is this the
yeah, go
ATF
ahead.
doing this, or was this just the FBI doing this?
So this was initially it was the ATF. So eventually the FBI showed up and they took over lead of the standoff. And they tried to start really kind of implementing some negotiation tactics and tried to be maybe a little bit more civil and tried to do some sort of mediation, but everything was so kind of messed up from the beginning, from that very first raid where the ATF went in and just guns blazing. Everything, it was just soiled from there.
Mm-hmm.
And the prophet, quote unquote, David Koresh was kind of writing a memoir while he was in there, claiming that he was receiving kind of I guess inspiration from God to the things that his people should and shouldn't do. And really, I think everyone in there was just kind of going crazy. But negotiations between the two sides eventually completely broke down. And on April 19th, so the initial warrant raid was on February 28th. Now on April 19th, is 51 days later, the ATF launched what is now called kind of the final assault on the compound. And it was an absolute disaster. They kind of went in and started a couple different tactics, and they were ramming. They had like a tank, and they were kind of ramming the tank into the sides and launching tear gas canisters. It was just a full out military organized raid on this compound.
Well, like the tanks had like long pipes on the end of it, and they would like ram
Yep.
the pipes into the building and then pump the
Through the
gas
walls.
through the walls, and then pump
Yep.
the gas through the pipes.
So you have to think too, like I said, there was about 90 people in this compound.
Women and children,
And
men.
I would probably say over half of them were women and children.
Mm-hmm.
Probably more. Probably more like 75% of them were women or children.
And the tear gas that they're using, wasn't it like sarin gas that was like banned by the Geneva Convention? You can't even use that in war.
Yeah. It was incredibly, nasty stuff. So the assault ended in this just complete disaster. The compound itself actually caught on fire. And as the compound was burning, people were trying to escape. And the hard thing is too, is that we don't know the exact details. There's an amazing kind of, I guess we'll call it a live action documentary about this. I think it was on Netflix, right? It's called Waco.
Yeah.
Really good. But some of it, we don't know exactly what happened on the inside because we don't have cameras. We don't know. And so there are a couple survivors I'll talk about in a second, but we still don't quite know. In the documentary, there was kind of a safe room that was on the inside of the compound.
It was a big walk-in freezer.
Yeah, and the women and children had gotten during this raid, this final attack, this assault. The women and children had gone inside this massive walk-in freezer, and because of the place caught on fire and some debris and everything got in front of the door of the freezer, there was only one way in and out, and they could not get out. And so the entire place, the entire compound burnt to the ground. And there was, in the end, 76 people died, including David Koresh.
I think he shot himself in
76
he had someone shoot him, or he shot himself, right?
Yeah, I don't have the specific details.
I think that was what happened. Is he committed? I think he committed suicide because he wasn't in that part where he burned up. Or
Yeah. So 76 people died in this assault, and that's just Branch Davidians. That's not ATF agents, and then there were 9 survivors of the fire, 4 women and 5 children. So they have gotten some information from the survivors, but this incident, I mean, this was a very, very abbreviated version. There is so many details that it's incredible. But this incident in Waco is so highly controversial, and really it sparked a massive national debate about the force that is used by federal law enforcement agencies. How much power do they really have? And same thing with Ruby Ridge. You know, why can their rules of engagement just be shoot on sight, no questions asked, trigger happy, no negotiation tactics at all? No, that seems like a complete failure. So the ATF was extremely criticized for the way they handled the situation, and the incident itself has had a long-lasting effect on the agency's reputation. At the very beginning, Jared and I said that the ATF's kind of like the redheaded stepchild, as the saying goes, of the government agencies as compared to the CIA and the FBI, because they have some of these massive marks on their records. So there was a couple things that I will call out as the major failures of the ATF during the Waco. I don't want to call it an incident. I want to almost
massacre.
I almost want to call it a massacre, right?
Yeah.
The first one was a lack of proper planning. The ATF failed to properly plan the initial raid on the compound. They just went in, violent shootout, shooting through the doors. There was just no plan put in place. And they were heavily criticized just for going out guns blazing initially at the start. The second one, it kind of relates to that, an excessive use of force. Why was force and violence the first go-to, especially with women and children in this compound? Including, some of those things were the force that was used on these tactics, like the loud music and the lights and the water and cutting off communication. Those are like military torture tactics. They were used on these women and children. I mean, there's babies in there. So I don't know. It's hard to think about. But third one is poor communication. The ATF just was not communicating with the people that were in the compound at all. There was very little negotiation. Whenever the FBI got there, they'd kind of started to do something, but the relationship had already been ruined. Lastly was a lack of transparency. The ATF itself has been accused of, let's say, I don't want to say fabricating some of the details, but there are many questions and inconsistencies about what happened during the incident. Some people believe that the ATF has not been completely forthcoming with some of the things that happened, some of the things that they did and said, that they kind of didn't tell the truth about who shot first, or just kind of some of these intricate details that matter. Mm-hmm. Or were they the ones that shot first, or were they who shot in defense of the other?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Overall, it's seen as a massive failure due to the violence that occurred, the loss of life that occurred, and the long-lasting just negative effect on the agency's reputation. Not only that, but just kind of the government in general.
Yep.
And examples like this in Ruby Ridge, where they just completely overstep their boundaries.
Yeah, totally. And that isn't even talking. And these are just two examples from the 90s. There's been other examples, like the standoff that occurred in, I think it was Oregon or Idaho, with, what was his name? Bud something. Or, yeah.
Bundy.
Bundy. Or, yeah, Bundy something.
Ted Bundy, yeah.
Not Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy's a serial killer, but his last name was Bundy.
Yeah.
Clive Bundy, I think his name was. There was a whole
that
thing.
family,
where they basically, these guys were kind of, there was this whole standoff thing, and then like the ATF just gunned these people down out of their cars, and it was crazy. So, we're probably going to get put on some kind of government watch list for having this, but I mean, seriously, it needs to be told.
Hey, we're probably already on that watch list, to be completely honest.
But this is what America's all about, man, and we got to stand up against this type of like Chinese tyranny that we see all the time in these other countries. This just can't fly in America. And so this type of stuff where these agencies have these cowboys out here just shooting people left and right, this is unacceptable, totally unacceptable. And I don't know, it's important to stand up against that. And this kind of stuff is not gone and done with. We're seeing it today. Every single Twitter file drop that comes out, we see again and again and again. Oh, the White House was telling Twitter to repress these certain people's accounts. Oh, the Congress.
They weren't only telling them; they were paying them money.
Yeah. The FBI paid that Twitter $3 million to cancel
silence people's accounts,
Twitter accounts about coronavirus, about January 6th, about all this stuff. Yeah, man, it's just unbelievable. A congressman who was being criticized, he goes in and says, "Hey, you need to cancel any mentions of, this committee on Twitter. Cancel it right now. Like, don't let it go."
You know where you need to look? You need to look at if you're trying to find a fire, you need to look at where everyone's shooting the fire extinguishers, not the distraction over here of the belly dancer trying to distract you about what's going on. You need to, that was a weird analogy, but it's just like where everyone is trying to say, oh, you don't see anything, where everything is trying to get hidden. That's just like a proof that there's something there.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, right?
Yeah, seriously.
The Wizard of Oz. So crazy. We're still living in this time. I would say that with coronavirus, and especially with this January 6th thing, man, I would say it's even worse today than it was even back then. I mean, with the amount of government like corruption and, especially the FBI would go to Instagram or Twitter. They would say, "Hey, we can't officially tell you to cancel these people's things. That would be an infringement on their First Amendment rights, but we can tell you to cancel them based off of your own policy." So, wink, wink.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is hate speech.
Yeah.
So, lastly, I wanted to say about the ATF, and the ATF is kind of a weird one too, because they are specific to firearms. Mm-hmm. They kind of have some weird powers to be able to determine, or let's say interpret, firearms as it applies to laws. So the ATF doesn't create laws. I guess Congress is really the one that creates these laws and changes laws, but the ATF has the power to interpret firearms. So they've kind of done some really weird things, and it's kind of hard to get into and explain all of them, but I kind of have two that stand out. So one is initially whenever I say the word machine gun, Jared, how would you define a machine gun?
Anything that looks menacing.
Any gun that is black.
Yeah,
any gun that is black is.
That's what the Congress says. Or any gun that has the thing that you push, a muzzle, the shoulder thing that goes up. What did the Congresswoman say? A muzzle brake is the shoulder thing that goes up that makes it fully automatic.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So yeah, I was gonna. We should probably do a whole other episode on like political blunders and complete misunderstanding of fully semi-automatic weapons.
Yeah. Yeah.
So machine gun previously in the world of that everyone knows, right? I say everyone loosely. A machine gun is a firearm that when you pull the trigger and you hold the trigger down, the bullets don't stop coming out until you run out of bullets, right? So I'm trying to say it as simply as possible. It's a fully automatic. You pull the trigger one time, and if you have 30 rounds in your magazine, it's going to shoot all 30 rounds
As
with
long as
one trigger.
as long as you hold
As
that
l-
trigger down.
As long as you hold the trigger down, it will keep firing. Boom, 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 boom. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's a fully automatic weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Right. A semi-automatic weapon is a firearm that is one trigger pull equals one bullet. You pull the trigger, and that's one boom.
Mm-hmm.
Then you let go of the trigger, and you have to pull the trigger again. That's another boom. That's semi-automatic.
Does a
That is
binary
going to be
Oh, go ahead.
yeah.
That's too complex. Binary triggers, because there are triggers that the binary trigger where if you pull it back it
Yeah,
fires, and if
but-
you let it go it fires as well. So it's like somewhere in
Yeah.
between fully auto and it's not fully auto because it's
Yeah.
just two fires,
So-
one.
Yeah. So that's semi-automatic is one trigger pull, one boom.
Yeah.
Most pistols are going to be semi-automatic. Almost all pistols are going to be semi-automatic. And then even your traditional AR-15s, the weapons of mass destruction, the weapons of war that everyone's talking about and they're all in the news, those are not the same guns that these guys in the military are carrying around. They might look the same, but they are not. They do not have the same functionality. The ones that we have, and I say we as in everyone around, right, that has one.
I don't have that.
Yeah, I lost it in a boating accident. They're semi-automatic, and it's one bullet per trigger pull. So what happened was, and there is a thing that you can do that's called bump firing, a semi-automatic gun.
Mm-hmm.
And if you hold it just right, basically you can use the recoil of the weapon to make your trigger pull happen faster. So every time you pull the trigger, you pull it, boom, pull it, boom, pull it, boom, pull it, boom. If you can bump fire a weapon, then it's kind of like boom, 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 boom. It's still pulling the trigger every time, but it uses the recoil of the weapon to help speed up a little bit that process.
Mm-hmm.
So there was these things that were invented that were called bump stocks. And it was a special stock that you could, the stock is the shoulder part of the weapon that you could put on a semi-automatic rifle that would assist you in, I guess, pulling the trigger faster.
Mm-hmm.
And they say that it simulates, that's air quotes, simulates automatic fire. And so it might simulate it, but it still is on a weapon that you have to pull the trigger one time for every bullet, which is a semi-automatic gun. Well, the ATF came out in 2018 after the incident in Vegas where there was the shooting at that concert.
That's a whole other episode we should do on that thing.
Yeah, the guy had on several of his weapons, he had bump stocks. And so the ATF came out, and they can't just write a law that says that bump stocks are illegal. But what they can do is they reinterpreted and redefined what is classified as a machine gun.
Oh, really?
So they basically just reclassified a machine gun as how we defined it earlier, but they added onto it any device that makes your weapon fire that in a way that mimics a machine gun. And so it's just like, well, if you can just change the definition of what we're looking at, then who's to say that it doesn't just keep changing. And then they end up just saying, oh, anything that looks like a gun is a machine gun.
Yeah.
Which is just like, doesn't make any sense. And so that's just one example. There's another one about pistol braces that is kind of interesting. But the thing is, and I'm going to go back to the bump stocks real quick, is that they made that this interpretation now made bump stocks illegal. Well, there are thousands of people in the United States, tens of thousands probably, that have bump stocks that purchased them legally before they fit this definition of a machine gun. And so now, as of March 2019, it is it made it illegal to manufacture, import, possess, sell, or transfer bump stocks. So anyone out there that has a bump stock right now, you're a felon.
Crazy.
And they want to do things like that for, I'm doing a lot of air quotes here, high capacity magazines, right? Any magazine that can go in a firearm that has more than 10 rounds, they want to make that illegal. So you're like instantly going to make probably millions of people around the whole United States instantly, if that came out, felons.
Mm-hmm.
So
and then
they just,
it doesn't matter what you do. If they disagree with you, hey, this guy, we disagree with what he's saying. He's saying something that we don't like on Twitter. Let's send the ATF to his house, and I'm sure he's got probably a 10-round mag at his house. Boom, arrested. That's how they got, it doesn't matter what it needs to be. It's just everybody's a criminal now, and they just all they have to do is have a reason just to not like you, and then they'll go into you. Because maybe you're calling out some corruption. Maybe you're calling out something they don't like. We've seen this with the Twitter files, and then they come to your house and say, "Hey, you're a felon because we now found a 10-round mag that is now illegal, and you're actually
a 30-round mag.
A 30-round mag that's illegal, and you're a criminal now."
Yeah. So that seems like a lot of power. I don't know what regulatory body regulates the ATF and what they do. I hope isn't it weird that
Department of Justice,
it just seems like,
and then Congress, I would imagine,
guess,
is oversight over that.
I guess that's true, and maybe this is just me, maybe this is a different conversation, but to me, for some reason, it just seems like all of the heads of these organizations are super liberal.
Yeah. Well, they're usually put in by these.
But even when Trump was president, I felt like it was like they were constantly going back and forth with the FBI and issues and kind of these liberal people that are leading all of these organizations that don't even particularly understand half the stuff that the ATF does or stands for. I don't know.
Well, dude, the FBI has been so corrupt recently. It's unbelievable. Like, you look at these dossiers that they fabricated. We could talk for hours about how corrupt the FBI is frequently. In my mind, the FBI has absolutely no credibility anymore. I mean, they're so politically motivated in so many things that it's like they're just out for one agenda, basically. But even, to say like, oh, why is this happening when Trump's in office? I think that's it's assuming too much that Trump was such a good guy. Whereas I think Trump was, I think there was a lot of good things that happened under Trump. I think it was much better than it is now, but I think he's,
well, I'm not even
other
saying
side,
like,
other wing of the bird,
Yeah, and I'm not even saying that he was such a good guy and that it was even like morally. I'm just saying like,
well, not even that.
What about more like conservative type laws. I mean,
Yeah.
it just seems like the federal government, the more powerful it gets, it's just the more they're trying to regulate
Yep.
freedoms like the Second Amendment.
Yep.
And there's just all these different options for them to be able to get you on something.
Yep.
So
Get you.
be
they'll
careful,
Get
be
you,
aware.
The ATF will get you, or the IRS and their new 80,000 agents will get you, or something.
They're not gonna be looking at anyone that makes less than $400,000.
Oh, sure.
That's
sure,
what Biden
sure.
said.
Yeah, right. Yeah, man, they got an army of people. So you're already basically a criminal. I mean, who out there is actually doing their taxes 100% correctly? I would venture to say nobody. So you're on the government's bad list, and all you got to do is say something that they don't like, and then you're going to be square. They already have everything they need against you. They just have to come up into your house, and we suspect that he might have guns in his house. Pull the warrant. Done.
So, needless to say,
keep your eyes sharp. Keep your eyes sharp, and protect yourselves, and speak up against this kind of stuff. That's what we're trying to do on this podcast. This is not the America that we want. This is, these incidents are extreme examples, but we're seeing it now too. This stuff hasn't stopped. We're seeing it now with this corruption and this lying and this targeting and all this kind of stuff. So fight against this.
I think one way to fight against it is to educate yourself.
Yep.
Educate yourself on number one, maybe history,
mm-hmm.
things like this, but as well, kind of what's happening currently, what's going on, what's the political environment look like, what's, and you don't have to get into it so much and become a crazy political enthusiast. But I think it's important, and part of building your creed is to be aware of what's going on in the country, in the economy, in the neighborhood, in the community, in your state.
Yep. Because even like what I think with Ruby Ridge, and even maybe to some extent this Waco thing, even those people that wanted to be left alone by society, the government, like with Randy Weaver, moved his family into a cabin in the middle of a 20-acre land in the middle of Idaho, the government still came after him and killed his family. And so whether you like it or not, you should be aware of what's going on, and fight for justice, fight for freedom, fight for truth, fight against these tyrannical injustices that are being carried out by some of these federal agencies.
Yeah, I completely agree. So hopefully you've learned something from this. Hopefully it's not all doom and gloom, but I think that there is definitely positive things that we can take out of this, positive things for our own life that we can use to learn, to grow, to teach our own children, the future generations that will be eventually taking over these things.
Yep.
What can we teach them?
Exactly.
And so I invite all of you to do these things, to teach and to learn, and to be an influential part of your own community. And we invite you to build your creed with us as we build our creeds together.
All right, let's do it.